Chapter 49. Connections. When Leo used the secret knock, there were a few people that he might have expected to open Ame's door. Renetta Dolahan didn't make the top 5. She didn't make the top 10. She didn't even make the top 50. And yet, here she was. She looked between him and Melissa with a raised eyebrow. "Gonna stand there gawking until my arms fall off, or are you two going to come in?" "Is everything all right?" he asked as he stepped inside. The entryway beyond was empty and dark, and he didn't hear anyone else nearby. Where is everyone? Shutting the door behind Melissa, Renetta rammed the bolt home to lock it. "They're fine. They're all out back, playing with their new toys for tomorrow." She rolled her eyes as she said it, but there was a hint of a smile hiding beneath her cheeks. Her eyes were tired, her ears drooping slightly, and not just from the late hour. The last 2 days had been exhausting for everyone. Anyone who knew what was coming and still managed to sleep soundly would have to be a machine. "Then that's probably where we need to be," Melissa said, heading into the home. "Ame told me she was making gear for us as well." "Nothing for you, Madam Minister?" Leo asked Renetta as they walked. Shaking her head, Renetta's voice was a little hoarse as she replied, "She gave me a gift this morning, but I had my own work to be doing." There was a light on in the next hall. The lamp by the telephone was on. Strands of graying fur dotted the creases of the armchair beside it, and an open address book and fountain pen balanced together on the chair's arm. Not all work involved footwork. "Did you find anything we can use?" Renetta asked. Coming to a stop, Melissa and Leo exchanged a look. The past 2 days had flown by. They'd done so much digging, their clothes still smelled like last night's coffee. Unfortunately, they had frustratingly little to show for it. "Bradburn is annoyingly good at covering his tracks," Melissa began. "Worse, he's managed to get the approval of the 13 on most everything he's done. Anything we have that might be worth bringing him to trial is only supported by circumstantial evidence right now." Renetta took this in with little change in expression, as if she'd expected this outcome. "Tolson's still digging into the numbers like you suggested," Leo said. "He said he'll phone us if he finds anything." Renetta nodded. "Bradburn isn't sloppy, but when you work on such a large scale, it's impossible not to leave a trail." With a nod of her own, Melissa said, "That's what we're counting on. I just hope we can find it in time." She trailed off for a moment, then her face gained a melancholy smile. "In other news, Bradburn's taken the liberty of exercising his ill-gotten position as Minister of Justice to order police from all Cyphus precincts to add to his security at the summit tomorrow. That includes our precinct in District 3. But get this, he sent a list of the officers he wanted. Guess he didn't trust who people like me, or Leo, or Tolson might send to answer his call. Good news is that there's nothing forbidding volunteers. So while we suspect that the people on the list are either oblivious to Bradburn's schemes, or already on Bradburn's payroll, we've already gotten a lot of officers who weren't on the list to volunteer for tomorrow. That will give us some friendlies to back us up." Gathering those volunteers had been an arduous process. They hadn't trusted people at the precinct not to report sightings of them back to Bradburn. To be safe, Tolson had set up individual meetings over the last few days, sending people he trusted to go meet Melissa and Leo. Only a few people had turned them down. Renetta looked pleased at the news. "My forces are gearing up for tomorrow as well. Before all this, I had one of the largest security forces in the Bulb. I had a target on my back from the moment I joined the 13. The entrenched ones didn't like me because I was new, and by their standards, I'm young. Plus, I'm a woman, which gave them no end of irritation. So, rather than rely on the response of police to be sufficient for protecting my factories and assets, I took matters into my own hands. No offense, loves." Leo lifted a hand dismissively. "You're fine." Smirking, Renetta said, "Of course I am. I didn't have to say it, but I enjoy being polite to the people I like. Regardless, I've got the numbers to outperform the forces of 1, maybe 2 members of the 13. If Bradburn's backed by all 5 of the other survivors, that would be a problem. It's imperative that we get the other 13 on our side before the shooting begins. Raising an eyebrow, Leo asked, "You're confident you can sway them?" "Love, confidence is my strongest attribute. My powers of persuasion are a close second. I'll make them see reason." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Our lives depend on it." Then she fixed them both with a smile. "Thank you for the update and for your service. Don't let an old woman keep you from joining in on the fun. I'm sure they're waiting out back with toys for you, too." "You won't join us?" Melissa asked. With a shake of her head, Renetta gestured towards the phone. "I still have more work to do. Besides, I'd just as soon leave the weaponry in more capable hands than my own. I wield money and words, not guns, love." As quickly as she'd pulled them aside, she dismissed them. So they left her to her chair and headed out into the yard. Melissa squinted as she held up the aquam crystal cartridge. It sparkled ice blue in the fading sunlight, rivaling the vibrancy of her eyes. She was focused on admiring the special shotgun round, but Leo found himself once again admiring her. Seed Mother. He didn't deserve to breathe the same air as someone as fearless, dedicated, honest, and loyal as Melissa. The intrusive thought made him want to kick himself. She'd reopened the door for friendship. He had to content himself with that. He would content himself with that. He couldn't avoid her, because that would hurt both of them again. Any pity party for himself would be a slap in the face to her kindness. He was her friend, and she was his friend, and that was how it should be. "This seems bigger than the crystals we practiced with," Melissa said. "This feels like a slug round." Leo forced himself to divorce his thoughts and focus on the moment at hand. Ame and Naira stood with them at a small table they'd set up outdoors. Well, Naira stood. Ame had enough standing for one day and traded her exoskeletal electrum legs for her wheelchair. She peered over the top of her glasses, ears flicking back with her snort. "It is bigger, though it's not going to behave like a slug. Not unless you shape it that way. Each one of these shells has two parts. The main crystal and a smaller aurum one behind it to give your magic propellant. If you want your ice to have any momentum, it's got to have wind behind it. Same with any of the reactions. So you could shape the ice into a slug, though I suspect shaping it like pellets or shrapnel will be far more effective." On the table were a pair of shotguns. They were heavy-duty creations, almost military grade. With a surprisingly bulky barrel and well-padded stock, they looked designed to protect themselves and their user from a lot of punishment. Dozens of shells lined the table, each stuffed with a brightly colored crystal. A pair of empty bandoliers laid across a pair of small backpacks with prism tanks and gas masks. "We're already almost to dinner time, so let's keep this moving," Ame said. "Pick a shotgun and the crystals you're most comfortable with, and let's get you used to them. The shotguns are practically identical, so no squabbling." After exchanging a shrug of deference, Melissa and Leo each took one. Donning a backpack and a bandolier, Melissa selected several aquam and aurum shells right away, but Leo had no idea what he wanted. "Melissa, with me," Ame said, wheeling out into the yard. Adjusting to its weight, Melissa brought the alchemantic shotgun into a resting position, then followed as instructed. So many colors on the table. No white, but that made sense. Leo wasn't sure how effective or useful Curum would be coming from a shotgun. That left the other 6. "There's no right answer, Leo," Naira said, walking up to join him at the table. "We're just providing the tools. It's up to you guys to decide how to best use them." "I can do the basics with most any of the elemental ones, but I don't feel like any of them really call to me. Not the same way Melissa seems to click with Aquam, or you click with Electrum." Naira sighed, and Leo immediately assumed he'd said something wrong, or proven himself to be a lost cause. Then she nodded. "That's probably my fault. I've only been training everyone with the 4 basic elements and with Curum. Normally, that's enough to help people find what clicks for them. Based on your history,
I'm pretty sure I know what's going to click for you.
She shrugged.
People who study alchemancy tend to gravitate towards one or two preferred reactions to specialize in and hone their skills with those. Generalists, like me, are far more rare, so it's not a bad thing to get used to all of them. My recommendation for you? Stick with that here. Take a couple of each so you can get used to using the shotgun as a catalyst, but take some Terram and Necrom too. In fact, take a handful of both. I'm going to give you a bit of tutoring, and we're going to experiment a little. With a nod, Leo put on the prism pack. Pulling the remaining bandolier over his shoulder, Leo followed her advice, loading up a couple of each color, and taking 5 each of the green and purple ones. As anti-Necrom as Naira generally was, it seemed odd that she should recommend it now. But she was the teacher, and she had yet to steer him wrong. Picking up the shotgun, it was remarkably front-heavy. With the weight involved, he might have assumed the barrel was solid, though he knew it wasn't. However, as he tested it, the weight was more evenly spread than he was initially led to believe. Butting it against his shoulder, he widened his stance and snapped into a firing position. It was a little heavier than he might like for a shotgun, but definitely workable. He joined the others out in the yard, where a makeshift firing range had been set up. A series of mannequins had been set out, each sporting thick padding that already bore scorch marks and other evidence of alchemantic activity. It didn't seem like the kind of thing Ame would keep on hand, so she must have had Renetta procure them. Melissa's eyes already sported prismatic glow behind the face shield of her mask as she aimed her shotgun at the nearest target. Ame sat a few feet behind her, offering advice. Then Melissa pulled the trigger. White frost spilled out the barrel of the shotgun moments before it went off with a loud popping sound almost like a gunshot. The mannequin's head ripped from its body, bouncing and rolling through the grass. It came to rest about 10 feet away, the face peppered with over half a dozen shards of ice, each as large as a thumb. Racking her shotgun, Melissa steadied her aim and fired at the same target again. This time, the foam wrapping the body split. Several small chunks fell free as dozens and dozens of tiny holes now dotted the simulated armor. The force of the blast rocked the mannequin backwards, and the only reason it stayed upright was that it had been staked into the ground. Walking behind his friend, Leo joined Naira where she was waiting. While he got his mask on and cinched up around his snout, she went and fussed with the mannequins closest to the two of them. She seemed to be giving them knives and other small metal objects to arm them. Melissa talked quietly with Ame, holding any further fire until Naira was safely back by Leo. Leo's world lost some of its dreariness as the prism hissed into his lungs. The contrast between the oranges and yellows of the dwindling sunlight and the blues and whites of the yard's scattered electrum lights sharpened. The individual colors seemed to stand apart from each other, their boundaries becoming more distinct, like each one wanted to be appreciated for its own shade and hue. Start however you like, Naira said. I want you to get a feel for your catalyst before we try the fun things. Basics first and work from there. Leo pulled out his Aurum shells, loading them both through the bottom of the shotgun. Racking the first shell, he lifted the shotgun to his shoulder and sighted in on the nearest mannequin. Only once he felt fully prepared did he pull the trigger. He was not prepared. He felt the response within the shotgun as the mechanism inside crushed the Aurum crystals in the shell. His prism alerted him to the sizable Aurum reaction building inside the barrel, seeking release. He barely had time to reach out to it with his mind and send it a direction before the shotgun forced him to take a step back to not fall over. The Aurum surged forward, slamming into the mannequin he'd targeted and whipping the props from its hands. The mannequin crashed backwards to the ground, tearing free from the stakes that had held it to the ground. A large chunk of foam had ripped free from its chest, and the wind magic had shredded it mid-air. Now, tiny bits of foam sprinkled to the ground like synthetic snow. The thunderclap of so much Aurum rocked his prism-enhanced ears painfully, despite the sound dampening that the padding within the mask provided. Ow. Leo was thankful he'd known to keep the shotgun pressed firmly to his shoulder, or the recoil would have left one fanina of a bruise. Still, he was proud, and it was hard to suppress a grin. The other mannequins around his target had been buffeted, but only his target had gone down. Despite being caught off guard by the strength and speed of the reaction, he'd managed to focus it just on the target he wanted. He was improving at this. He spread out the next Aurum shot, focusing on 3 targets, all within arm's length of each other. As before, the weapons were flung from their grasp. This time, the burst was spread out enough that it rocked the mannequins backwards, but didn't tip any fully over. Experimenting with Electrum, Aquam, and Fyrum brought forth similar results. Each one produced a reaction far stronger than he was used to utilizing, but Naira explained that the catalyst bought him time to react. Not that it felt like a lot of time, but it was enough. At some point during the testing, a cry of surprise from Melissa drew his attention. She stared dumbfounded at the mannequin she'd just shot, and after Leo followed her gaze, he understood why. It was frozen solid from head to toe, encased in several inches of ice. Oh, Dross, that actually worked! I told you that you were letting too much of the reaction escape, Ame commented from her wheelchair. These are far more potent than the little crystals Naira has been training you with. Like I told the youngsters, we're equipping you with weapons. Naira vouches for your responsibility, otherwise I never would have made these. There's enough violence in Cyphus already. Use these to stop the senseless variety. Now, for our next attempt, we're going to make a wall. After seeing something amazing like that, there was no doubt that Aquam was Melissa's comfort element. So what was Leo's? Naira walked out amongst the mannequins, rearming them with their lost weaponry. The metal had helped as a grounding point for the Electrum shells, but been blown away again during the Fyrum testing. What mannequins remained were battered, smoldering husks of what they had been at the start. I'm down to Tarim and Necrum, Leo said, as Naira returned to his side. Let's start with Tarim. Leo obediently loaded the green shells as Naira continued talking. We've discussed Tarim for its calming purposes before. That's a byproduct of nature magic, but it is not the full result. If you leave the reaction to its own devices, it will disperse that way over a period of minutes, but that is not all you can do with it. From working with you, you've proven yourself to be a visual learner like myself. May I? She held out her hand, and Leo passed her the loaded shotgun. After dosing up with a canister of Prism from her bag, she racked the shotgun and lifted it to her shoulder. The nice thing about Tarim, she explained, is that it's a slow reaction. This means that the timing window to capture it is more forgiving. That also means you have to give it a little encouragement. Observe. She fired. Green energy gathered at the end of the barrel, then burst forward from the gun as the secondary Aurum reaction went off. The green ball swelled as it traveled, reaching the height of an adult within a few seconds. Just before it reached the mannequin she targeted, vines shot out from the dense central mass. They spread through the air like a spider unfolding its legs, then snapped back in the other direction, wrapping around not 1, not 2, but 3 mannequins, and drawing them together like fish caught in a net. Round and round the vines curled, wrapping tighter and tighter until no part of the mannequins could be seen through the ball of jungle growth. Naira smiled to herself in satisfaction. I could get used to crystals like these. The nice thing is that the reaction should keep going for minutes. If they don't get loose right away, they're not likely to get loose until all the Tarim is spent. For a moment, her focus returned to the enormous ball of vines and mannequins. It seemed to wither under her prismatic stare, the vines uncurling and dragging the mannequins back to their starting positions. Then she handed the gun back. Now you try. And try he did. As she said, the Tarim proved to be slower to respond. Not lethargic, just slow. It certainly felt more Leo's speed, though his first 2 shots only ensnared a single mannequin. With the next 2 shots, he improved and ensnared 2 mannequins at once. He'd have to work on that. And yet, it still didn't click like he'd hoped. That, or he was severely overthinking this. That just leaves Necrum, he announced, looking down at the purple shells slotted into the ammo belt running across his chest. Then he glanced up at the very life-size, but equally lifeless, mannequins.
Won't it just be wasted on targets like these?
Perhaps not in your hands, Naira said cryptically.
Well, that answers everything, Leo said as he started loading the Necrom shells. Giving a small smile of embarrassment, Naira shook her head.
I am not trying to withhold anything from you. I've spent most of my life only knowing Necrom's effects on organic material. I've never known it to be able to target inorganic material. I've assumed it to be a toxin and used it accordingly. You've changed that perception, and we're going to test it. Now, before you fire anything, I want you to be aware of the different materials involved. The mannequin itself is a simple, hard plastic. It's wrapped in layers of dense foam to simulate armor, and I've given it deadly metal weapons to threaten you with. Leo looked at the closest mannequin with a skeptical eye. It held a discolored piece of scrap iron and a fork.
Is it going to eat me? He asked.
Assume it will, if you don't disarm it.
Disarm it?
When you fought my son, you said there was a lot of Necrom involved.
Leo nodded, the scent fresh in his nostrils and on his tongue as he thought back to the hospital skirmish. Yeah, the whole sublevel was flooded with it.
And somehow you directed it into your gun. Ame and I have looked it over again and again, and there's no residue behind. Yet the mass had to go somewhere. You didn't melt your gun, yet somehow it's still decayed, like your fingers disintegrated it. For lack of a better term to describe it, you rapidly decomposed metal. Do you realize how big of a scientific breakthrough that is?
Leo? Science? He'd studied enough to get through schooling as a kid, but he was hardly the science type. Sorry?
Don't apologize. Demonstrate. What we have now is conjecture and a hypothesis. What we need is testing and proof. When you shoot, I want you to pick just one of the materials involved with your target and focus on it. If you need more specific metallurgical information for your visualization, I can provide it, but I'm hoping you don't.
Leo felt his eyes glazing, but he forced a nod and pretended full comprehension. If I've messed up metal before, should I try that first? The look he received was one of parental pride. Naira beamed at him as if he was her star pupil, something he'd never been for any teacher ever. It felt weird, but it was coming from Naira, so it was also wholesome.
We'll make a scientist of you yet, Leo Parsons.
Right, he said, and pulled the trigger. The shotgun's barrel glowed purple at the tip. The familiar warmth of Necrom brushed against the edge of his mind, but it didn't envelop his senses as it usually did. With the degree of separation the gun offered him, he could observe the Necrom without it biasing his thinking. It felt like watching a friend through a window. He was happy to see it, but also happy it wasn't talking him into letting it come in. It wanted someone to hug, to embrace, to envelop. So he focused his thoughts on the nearby metal. A purple cloud of mist erupted from the shotgun, spraying forward like a burst from a chemical extinguisher and smothering the mannequin. Beside him, Naira clamped a hand over her nose, her eyes already starting to water. The Necrom wasn't satisfied with the metal. He could feel it asking for more friends to pick apart. He didn't give it any. Instead, he doubled down, keeping the metal the sole focus of his mind's eye. Seconds later, the purple mist evaporated, its energy spent. Naira gasped. Incredible. The mannequin stood where they'd last seen it, but the outer layer of plastic and foam was gone. Not just melted, but absent. The only reason it stood out at all was from the unevenness of the phenomenon. But that wasn't what had caused her response. The chunk of iron and the fork were both gone. Not bent, not melted, not laying in the grass. Gone. Try the foam next, she said. Leo racked the shotgun and complied. It was easier to hold the Necrom's attention this time, as if its loneliness was more easily combated with a bigger target. He didn't have to concentrate nearly as hard to keep it focused on just going after the foam. As before, when the purple cloud faded, the foam was gone. Stray bits dotted the ground around the mannequin,
but the mannequin itself was scrubbed clean of foam. "And the plastic?" she prompted. It took 2 rounds to fully dissolve the mannequin, but it disintegrated at his direction just as everything else had. Of the 3 materials, the foam had definitely been the fastest to go, with the plastic a close second and the metal a distant third. Necrum seemed to enjoy the targets that were easier to swallow in its embrace. "It's not a toxin," Naira said with wonder. "It's entropy. It's fundamental breakdown at an atomic level. It just has to be directed. I only ever saw what it did to the body, so I never even thought to direct it or give it a target." Leo stared at the suspiciously absent patch of grass beneath where the mannequin had been. It was unpleasant to think about how easy it was for excited Necrum to bring collateral damage. It was far more unpleasant to think about how easy it had been for him to direct it. He'd found his clique. Of course it was Anima's own power of wanton destruction that most readily responded to his command. Anytime he was handed something incredibly deadly, he was a natural expert with it. Even as he sulked, he pushed the thoughts away. It was a tool, same as his gun. If he let it control him, then yes, there would be problems. But he wouldn't do that. He would be the one calling the shots. He could use it to kill, yes. His mind, however, immediately thought of the non-lethal methods this would provide an officer who needed to subdue a target. "Does that count as scientific proof, then?" he asked. Naira turned to him with a smirk. "One test doesn't prove a theory. We'll just have to treat tomorrow as an extended test." "Goody," he said. With that, he racked another round and continued practicing. Glasses clinked together, ice rattling as Noel gathered what remained of Table 11's root beer floats. The pair of high schoolers hung on each other's arms as they went up front to pay their tab. Noelle pocketed the 5 Christum tip they'd left for her and added the rest of their dishes to her tray. It was dark outside, and a glance at the clock read 10:29. That meant... Right on cue, Jen burst from the kitchen. Her shift was supposed to be until 11, but when had that ever stopped her from leaving a half hour early? Admittedly, the dinner rush always trailed off by 9, and they would be dead right up until close. Jen brushed right past the waiting teens, throwing her coat on as she pushed through the front doors like a bull charging out of an unlocked stall. The poor teens glanced around in confusion, not seeing anyone else to ring them up. Jen couldn't even be bothered to take care of them on the way out? Go figure. Rigel and Mahandro were working the kitchen, so they left Noelle to work the floor. Setting the tray of dishes down on the bar top, Noelle wiped her hands on the dishcloth hanging from her pocket and rushed over to the register. "How'd everything treat you two tonight?" she asked as they handed her their bill. "Good," the taller of the pair said. Noelle gave him his total, and he fished out the right number of Christum while his companion stared at the jukebox. Dropping his change into his waiting palm, Noelle gave them a smile. "Well, thanks for stopping in tonight. Don't get into too much trouble tonight, y'all." She gave them a wink, and the pair flushed a bit, their tails swishing behind them. The tails brushed together and just made both of them even more embarrassed. Planting an elbow on the counter, Noelle gestured between them. "Y'all are real cute. If one of you gets your heart broke by the other, you just come back here and see me, you hear? I'm real good with faces. So y'all be good to each other, okay?" The pair of snapper teens went from looking embarrassed to afraid to solemn in a hurry. After muttering a few quick assurances, they took each other's arms again and left. Noelle hoped they'd work out. If not, at least it'd be a learning experience for both of them. Seed Mother was good about making sure everyone had a life full of learning experiences. Scooping up the tray of dishes again, Noelle dropped them off in Rigel's area. The boy got to scrubbing right away. Mahandro looked up from where he was scrubbing one of the countertops. "How are we looking out there?" the Nolfin chef asked. Just one active table," Noelle said with a shrug. "Gray?" "Gray." Mahandro nodded his understanding. Officer Tolson Gray was such a regular at Benji's, he may as well have been the diner's mascot. He knew all the other regulars, and he knew everyone on staff. He also had a knack for making even the most stressful or dreary of nights into a joy.
Why don't you go finish any tables that need cleaning? Mahandra said, a mischievous twinkle in his vibrant green eyes. While you're doing that, I'll get a special pot of coffee brewing for you two. Noelle smirked. Turns out, what goes around does actually come around. Even Rigel was grinning, as if he had any room to talk. His sweetheart had helped him work on the dishes the night before. The table cleaning went fast. She'd kept up with it, and had been a slow night anyway. Soon, she found herself headed to table 14 with a fresh pot of hazelnut coffee and a spare mug. Tolson had pulled a second table over and covered both tables with a literal pile of papers. Noel had picked up his dinner dishes long ago, and he'd utilized the extra space for more papers. Now, he sat near the center of the tables, elbows planted amidst the stacks with his forehead in his palms. His eyes stared sightlessly down at the rows and rows of text and numbers, and his ears and whiskers sagged in equal measure. You're looking a little droopy there, Mr. Gray. Care to share a little pick-me-up? She held up the steaming carafe like she was presenting a trophy for Ag Scouts. Tolson's chair creaked as he sat up with a yawn. Then he gave her a tired smile. I think that could help, Miss Noel. Take any chair you like. Leo and Melissa aren't coming back tonight. What you working on this evening? She asked as she refilled the mug he'd used for the past 4 hours. More murders or monsters? Tolson's lips twitched in a wry grin. Always. Taking a sip of his coffee, he leaned back with a sigh. Unfortunately, the only murder tonight has been my own. Death by boredom and drowning in numbers. Want a fresh set of eyes? She asked, pouring her own mug of coffee. He gestured to the papers. Be my guest. I still feel like this should be illegal. Nah, you're basically a consultant at this point. Plus, studying numbers is your thing. This is probably more up your alley than most things I've shown you. Seating herself beside him, she took a sip, enjoying the warm, creamy flavor before picking up the nearest sheet. Well then, Officer Gray, what are we looking at? As many financial records and documents as I could pull on the 13, as well as on the newest one, Walter Bradburn. Your uncle, she said, calmly scanning the page in her hands. It was the detailed payroll for security staff for Lortrin Tower. Yeah, Tolson said, unable to hide his surprise. Apparently, he'd assumed she'd forget his uncle's name or something. And what exactly is it that you're looking for? Any reason to arrest him. Noel glanced up from the sheet. That's vague. Explains why you've got so much dead tree filling up the table, though. He sighed. There's an extensive paper trail in my uncle's wake, but so far, all of it's been above board. There has to be discrepancy somewhere. Money taken or given under the table, money appearing or disappearing without explanation. We've spent almost all day poring over it and still turned up nothing that helps us. Well, why don't you walk me through some of what you put together so far? Seeing papers and numbers spread out like a tablecloth was enough to overwhelm and destroy most ordinary folks. Not Noelle. To her, every page on this table was part of an enormous jigsaw puzzle. This was simply the kind of puzzle where you didn't have the picture on the box to help you, and you could only hope you still had all the pieces. That made it a challenge, and that made it fun. Tolson spent the next hour going into as great of detail as he could manage. Noelle barely even noticed when Mahandro stepped out of the kitchen to bring them each a slice of pie a la mode. He must have come back for the empty plates at some point, because they were gone when Noelle found the first 2 puzzle pieces that clicked together. These transactions are identical, she said. Beside her, Tolson snored, a few stray crumbs of pie dotting the fur around his lips. She elbowed his shoulder, and he awoke with a start. Rubbing at his eyes with his palms, he apologized. Sorry, it's been a long couple of days, he said around a yawn. Find something. She found the 3rd puzzle piece while he was still mid-sentence. She laid all 3 sheets of paper side by side in front of him. There's a spending pattern. Identical spending patterns. Look. Pointing at each sheet in turn, she continued. Each of these is a private security firm employed by a different member of the 13.
Each one receives a small deposit of 5,000 Christum. Several days later, there's an enormous deposit of 2 million Christum. Then a week later, a final deposit of an additional million. A week after that, those deposits are all withdrawn and the money disappears. How many like this? 3 so far, though I suspect, she said, leafing through a nearby folder. Aha! That makes 4 now. Tolson leaned forward, blinking away his sleepiness. His eyes were brightening, as if he'd just gotten a shot of coffee straight in the veins. Like her, he appreciated the simple pleasure of finding solutions to things that seemed unsolvable. His eager smile wilted a little as he noted, "No record of where those deposits originate from, or where they end up. With numbers that large, I suspect whoever it is paying a pretty Christum to keep their name off the transaction records. That's a major no-no. Not sure you're into arresting people for that kind of fraud in Cyphus, but in Dakota, that sort of thing carries some hefty fines and non-trivial jail time." Tolson started counting off on his fingers. Once is a fluke, twice is a coincidence, 3 times is a pattern, 4 times has to be a crime. He said the last part with a cheesy, easygoing grin, and it was impossible for Noel not to return it. Now that we know what we're looking for, it should be easier to spot. He nodded. Agreed. But first, I'm going to need a bathroom break and more coffee. It was 10 minutes after 1 when Noel finally found the centerpiece of the puzzle. Rigel had been picked up by his dad an hour before, and Mahandro had left his precious kitchen to put on his coat in the lobby. He waved at the pair. "Noel, I'm going to lock up. Just don't let me find you two here in the morning. You both need sleep." Noelle gave a quick dismissive, "Yeah, all right," as she read and reread the page in her hands. Beside her, Tolson leaned back and gave a wave of his own. "Don't think I'll be able to sleep after whatever you put in that last batch of coffee, Mahandro. I feel too tired to move, but my eyelids refuse to close." Mahandro chuckled. "Gotta keep you coming back somehow." "See you tomorrow." "Yep, see ya." Noelle heard the door close, but her eyes were still fixed on the page. "Tolson?" "Yes?" "Tolson!" She shook the page. Laughing, Tolson gripped the corner of the page and leaned in to look at it. "Yes, Noelle? I can't read it when you're shaking like a kid on sugar." "This is from the Minister of Justice's asset reports," she said, pointing as he read. "Each of those deposits we found earlier originated here. Right here. Look at the dates and the Christum amounts." Tolson's brows furrowed. He was kind of cute when he entered his focus mode. Reaching out, he grabbed one of the sheets from earlier. They'd found 5 in total, each one partaking in these transactions about a month after each other. His brows furrowed even deeper, like they were going to tunnel through his snout and hug each other. Then they sprang apart as his eyes lit up. Taking his pen from his shirt pocket, he circled the name of the security firm, writing Lortrin, Minister of Commerce, beside it. He grabbed the next sheet they'd set aside. Again, he circled the name of the security firm and wrote another name beside it, one she didn't recognize. Then he wrote and underlined Minister of Mining. The next sheet was Minister of Agriculture. "Seed Mother," Tolson breathed as he labeled each of the sheets in turn. "I was too tired to notice it sooner. Each of these belonged to the security firms of the members of the 13 that were killed, with the transactions taking place the month they were assassinated. Paddock and Bradburn were paying off their security. That's why they had so much information for Naira. It's how they knew when, where, and how to hit their targets." "Naira is," Noelle prompted. "Our alchemy friend, the teacher, the Nulf that we brought in way back when you first started working here." "So, this is a big deal?" Tolson beamed at her like a child who'd just been given a birthday gift. "I think you just found proof of payment for the hits." Noelle allowed herself to slump back in her chair, exhaustion finally breaking past all the caffeine and adrenaline. Beside her, Tolson was having the opposite experience. He seemed energized, and he offered an enthusiastic high five. With a weary smile and a shake of her head, she returned the high five. "It's about time I found some real-world use for all my schooling." Tolson's grin only widened. He reached out and gently gripped her shoulder. You are an amazing and intelligent person and have forever cemented yourself as my favorite waitress. And right now, I need to make a phone call. His chair squeaked along the tile as he stood up, and Noelle had to reach out and catch it to keep it from falling over as Tolson jogged for the phone. She grinned as she watched the big doof go, eager like a deerhound at supper time. Leaning back, she cupped her mouth and called after him. I'm expecting one fanina of a tip for my service tonight, Officer Gray. Chapter 50. Entering the lair. Marston, I'm going to be fine. I already told you that I want you guarding Moira tonight. Leo grimaced as he fussed with his gear in the back of the armored car. His timing had been horrendous. No sooner had he stepped inside to stow his things than Renetta Dolahan and her head of security appeared outside to argue. He should have stepped out and made himself scarce right away to give them some privacy. Instead, he'd been quiet and tried to pretend he wasn't there so as not to interrupt. His hands moved, constantly shifting things around so that if anyone peeked in the back, he'd look like he was working. Their voices were raised, but not enough to carry to the whole garage. Just to his vehicle. Leo was filled with the same awkwardness that a kid felt when their parents argued just outside their room. Mum, I've assigned 3 squads to go with her to the concert, but the real danger is at the summit. You've been nearly assassinated twice, and I failed to protect you both times. I'm not letting it happen a third time. Marston, I could make a cruel remark about your effectiveness to quiet you down, but it seems unnecessary. If I thought you were a failure as much as you assume yourself to be a failure, I'd have fired you days ago. If the desire to follow your orders and do your job as instructed is not sufficient to get you to listen to me, then at least listen to logic and reason. You've already assigned the majority of our forces to accompany me. In addition, I'm taking 2.5 Alchemancers with me. 2.5? Well, that was rude. Accurate, Leo supposed, but it still stung just a bit. He shook his head with a wry smile. He didn't need to get involved in this conversation. He just prayed that it would be finished soon. Renetta continued. Both the boy and the tiger are larger than you, plus they have literal command of the elements. And according to all reports, the police chief is a crack shot. I know that you're already comparing yourself and stinging your own pride, but seriously, Marston, it's not a personal choice, it's a logical one. It's hardly a fair comparison when the tiger's larger than everyone, Marston said, sounding almost like a sulking teenager. Now you're just being petty, Renetta retorted. Marston, your concern has been noted, but either you do this job for me, or you don't come at all. There was a long, awkward silence, and Leo nearly used the opportunity to flee. Before he'd taken a step, Marston spoke again in a quiet, hurt tone. You would trust a Null? Some kit? Over me? A slap echoed through the garage, and Leo blinked in surprise. It really was like 2 parents fighting, and he had the inexplicable urge to stuff himself even further back in the vehicle. I'll not tolerate that kind of talk. You've worked with me for a decade, so you have no excuse for indulging in that kind of thinking. I've watched the boy in the practice fights. What he is does not affect what he can do. I trust him to be exceptional. I'm not asking you to watch Moira because I don't trust you to watch over me. I'm asking you because the list of people I can send with her to keep her safe is very small, and you're at the top of the people I trust. So stop slandering me, stop whining, be the man I know you are, and do the job that I can only entrust to you. Is that clear? Another long, awkward silence followed. Eventually, Marston gave a solemn, Yes, ma'am. Dismissed, Marston. Someone walked away. Leo could hear them leaving and took the opportunity to skedaddle. Unfortunately, Renetta was still outside, and he nearly bumped into her in his haste to be elsewhere. She greeted him with a practiced political smile. Chief? Madam? I suppose you heard that exchange. Leo's hand shot up to the back of his neck, and he shrugged. That kind of conversation comes with being in charge. doesn't make it pleasant for any party involved.
No, he agreed. You gonna be okay?
Renetta smirked. He's probably going to sulk for a bit, but he's one of the most stubborn and loyal men I've ever had the privilege to employ. Right now, he's hurt and upset, but he'll get over it. In the hour of crisis, he always comes through.
Except for the time that you were stabbed, Leo noted.
Renetta rolled her eyes. We were unprepared because we did not understand the threat involved. That is hardly his fault. Now we do understand the threat, and we have spared no expense to prepare. This time will be different. Plus, she added, if I get hurt this time, I can just blame it on someone who doesn't work for me, like you. Sue the police for negligence and get them to cover any hospital fees I incur? Sounds like a win to me. Giving her a flat look, Leo shook his head.
Precinct 3 is already underfunded. You'd bring in more money by throwing a bake sale in your rich folk neighborhood.
She grinned, Leo snorted, and the exchange was over. It was one of the things he appreciated about her. She was as much a normal person as the rest of them. Well, as normal as someone rich enough to employ thousands and thousands of people could be. While she had a knack for ruthless business practice, she was far from heartless or unapproachable. Unlike most people, however, she understood the critical importance of not overstaying her welcome. So Renetta went to find the next person to give instructions to. For his part, Leo wandered over to another section of the garage where Naira and Melissa were loading up a hoverbike. He couldn't keep the grin from his voice as he noted, Melissa, you're such a colorful beacon, they're going to see you coming from miles up the road. Probably going to hear you, too, with that much material. Melissa turned to give him a look of annoyance. She held her arms out to the sides, stretching the poofy, multicolored jacket she wore as she said, Sorry that fashion isn't what it used to be. I don't claim to be up to date on what the kids are into these days. She grimaced, tugging at the sleeves. Pulling one down to her wrist, just pulled the other sleeve up to her elbow. It also doesn't help that Moira's so much smaller than me. It just has to get us inside, Naira commented as she cinched a bag to the bike. Melissa's alchemantic shotgun was snugged behind it. Think you can be a convincing spoiled rich kid? Leo asked. No one asked for your opinion, Dad. You'll never understand me. Leo raised an eyebrow, and Melissa shrugged. I got some time to workshop it. Maybe let Naira do the talking? Ah, yes, talking, Melissa shot back. That thing that Naira's known for doing when there's lots of people around her with guns. I talk, sometimes, Naira said. Usually to buy me time to get a weapon or a fresh crystal. See? Melissa said, flashing a thin-lipped smile at Leo and throwing her arms wide. Plenty of time to play pretend with Bradburn's army. The pastel fabric made a slight ripping sound, and Melissa's eyes went wide. Glancing down towards an armpit, she scowled. Dross, this is tight. I'm probably going to have to redo a few seams before returning this. It looks good. No, it looks like I'm both colorblind and desperate for attention. He shrugged. Just used to seeing you in uniform. Makes me forget that you can look good in normal clothes. She gave him a withering look. What a compliment. Really had to dig deep to find something nice to say, huh? Leo blushed, his hand coming up to scratch at the base of his neck. I just mean we should find reason to do it more often. What? Dress up like teenagers? Be normal around each other. Whatever retort Melissa had prepared died on her lips. Behind her, Naira let out a quiet breath and focused on strapping something else to the hoverbike. Melissa's gaze was frozen for several long seconds. 1,000 apologies flooded Leo's brain, each one competing for how best to grovel and excuse himself from the conversation. Before he could settle on one, her gaze softened and she sighed. Are we not? I thought the past few weeks were normal between us. Her shoulders rose and fell in a constricted shrug as she continued. I mean, there's been a lot of near-death experiences and trauma dumping and heart-to-hearts, but it's the closest we've had to normal in a long time. Relieved, Leo nodded,
Feeling sheepish as he said, "I'd like to keep it that way."
Melissa flashed him a fang-ridden smirk. "Then don't die tonight. I'm just now getting to know the real you again. It'd be a shame if we didn't get to bond over coffee when this is all over."
"So we get Benji's after this?"
She snorted. "Benji's is a Tolson thing. It's not a you and I thing." Eyes widening, he said,
"So, coffee, then?"
"Coffee." She gave him a nod. "And then I plan to sleep for a week." He smiled, far easier than he had in a long time.
"I like that plan."
Rain pelted Leo. His toes soaked immediately as he stepped out of the back of the armored car. It was the price for wearing open-toed boots, though based on what they might encounter inside, it was a price well worth paying. A flash of lightning struck the central spire, and thunder cracked overhead immediately after. It was only a block away from the stadium, an enormous lightning rod towering over the city's geographic center. Its point stretched up for the glass of the dome, but couldn't quite reach. The armored car behind him sagged slightly. However, the spire was grounded, probably messed with the vehicle's repulsors and magnetic fields, or whatever. Probably. That sounded science-y. It didn't matter anyway. They were just going to park the vehicles once Renata's army was fully dispatched. Nearly 36 armored vehicles lined this portion of the parking lot. Every car in the line bore Renata's symbol. How fitting, Leo thought grimly. We've brought our own funeral procession. Even more cars and hoverbikes flanked the larger vehicles, ready to respond to any threat at a moment's notice. Beside him, Tigra threw his arms wide, lifting his face to stare directly upwards. Water disappeared in his fur, only to reappear by running down his cheeks and dripping from his jaw.
"Forget to shower or something?" Leo asked.
Tigra grinned, his eyes closed in contentment.
"No. Spend years underground, and water becomes gift. Not thing to take for assumption." "You mean take for granted?"
"Yes." Rolf stepped up then, the young Nolf hopping forward on one leg and tugging at the pant leg of his alchemantic suit. All his hopping splashed Leo's sopping toes even more. The kit had the luxury of closed-toe boots.
"You good?" Leo asked.
"These suits feel designed for sitting or for standing, but not rapidly changing between the two. I'm not worried, though. It'll walk out." Rolf shrugged, then shook himself out from head to toe. Leo turned his face away too late. Not that it mattered. Rain like this, he was going to get soaked anyway. Fanina, he was already soaked. Renetta's personal army poured out of the vehicles around them, filling the area with hundreds of people in Dolahan security attire. The majority were Sneppards, but there were a number of Nolfs scattered throughout the ranks. Those weren't hard to spot with their natural height advantage. Every man and woman on Dolahan's side was kitted out not like a guard or even an officer, but like a soldier. Many held rifles, and it was hard to find someone who didn't have a holstered sidearm and baton. Seed Mother grant that they wouldn't need any of that tonight. Please don't let this devolve into needless bloodshed. A blast of lightning flashed the world in white, and Leo's ears flattened against the simultaneous clap of thunder. Syphis itself was laughing at Leo's idealism. The weight of the shotgun was growing more familiar now, and the strap wasn't biting into his shoulder quite so badly anymore. He adjusted it anyway, falling in beside Renetta as she finally exited the vehicle. Rolf on her left, Leo on her right, Tigra behind, and dozens of guards forming up behind them. Renetta took a moment to glance at the stadium, peering out from under the umbrella she carried. I was the first one of the 13 to suggest a more central and more public meeting place. Trying to kill me and seize my funds wasn't enough for him. Now he's capitalizing on my good ideas. I'll not stand for it. If she was joking, Leo couldn't tell. A few moments later, she shook her head. Well, gentlemen, who's ready to march into Fanina with me? Their entourage certainly drew a lot of attention. Stepping into the main hall of the stadium brought immediate relief from the downpour, though it could still be heard hitting the windows and the roof. A great number of Renetta's people rang out ears, tails, hair, and anything else that was drenched. Leo was among them, though with his clothing as wet as it was, it didn't feel like it helped much. Beside him, Rolf looked rather unbothered. In fact, he looked around in obvious wonder. "This place is huge," he said, awe spilling from his voice. "Naira said you guys played baseball as kids. You never get to come see a professional game?" Rolf shook his head. "Tickets were too expensive, so we'd take a radio out into the yard and act out the game. Play as our favorite players in real time." Rubbing at the back of his neck, his eyes disappeared as he flashed an apologetic grin. "Sorry, saying it out loud makes it sound kind of sad." It was sad, though not in the way the kit seemed to think. Leo wasn't a sports guy. Baseball was a dry sport to him, and he didn't get the appeal. However, that wasn't commentary that this moment needed. Instead, he said, "When this is over, I'll take you kids to see a game. Assuming the world doesn't end tonight, there should be a game in a couple weeks." Rolf's eyes snapped open. "You'd do that?" It sounded about as appealing to Leo as opening the blinds first thing in the morning. And yet, there was visible excitement in the kit's bright eyes. That would be more than enough to make it all worth it. Allowing himself a smile wasn't as hard as he thought it would be, and he nodded. "Absolutely." He turned to find Renetta watching the exchange. She gave him a quick, approving nod, which somehow made it a little embarrassing. That was dumb. He was halfway through his 20s, way too old to be embarrassed. Renetta's crowd washed up against a wall of black and red suited guards. To a man, their uniforms sported that symbol that suspiciously resembled Bradburn's face. Like Renetta's people, guns hung from shoulders, and those thick vests probably held some type of thin armor plating. From the Bradburn security crowd, a man stepped forward and asserted himself. He was an older sneppard with the deep-seated scowl of an academy drill sergeant. His voice carried over the general den as he barked out, "What's the meaning of this? This venue has been reserved for official 13 business. March in here with weapons and you become a threat. Either someone explains or you all leave before I order my men to fire." Great. Both front lines snapped to attention at that, men and women raising weapons and training them on each other. Now it was Renetta's turn to scowl. Beside her, there was a faint hum from Rolf's back as he activated at least one of his batteries. Like the Bradburn Mook, Renetta knew how to make her voice carry. "Hold your fire!" She stepped forward, her people making a path for her to reach the front of the pack. The man's expression went from a scowl to downright shock as he saw her. "If this is an official meeting of the 13, then you have no right to bar entry to the Minister of Labor. I've arrived a little late, yes, but I'm here nonetheless." As the guard's shock faded, it was replaced with a look of anger, maybe even disgust. His whiskers twitched as he showed one fang, then the other. Without taking his eyes off of her, he barked out, "Let her pass! Her security stays here in the lobby. We'll escort her from here." "Absolutely not," she snapped back. "There have been 2 attempts on my life in recent weeks. Where I go, my security goes. It's non-negotiable." The man's ears were tilted so far back, they looked like they were trying to twist themselves off. Through gritted teeth, he hissed, "With the concert in the other end of the stadium, our security is stretched a little thin. For the sake of avoiding an incident, it would be a great boon to all parties if we were able to strengthen our perimeter." "Then find solace in the fact that my people will be strengthening the inner perimeter. I can promise you, with them in the room, no unsavory person is going to reach the 13. He hesitated, clearly having grasped the situation, even if most of his people did not. "I can't just let you—" Renetta took a step into his space, cutting him off. "I'm perfectly aware of my rights. My presence is required at that meeting, and considering the present dangers of this evening, I'm not going without my own people. So either stand aside, or my big friend here will set you aside." She gestured with a casual hand to Tigra. The enormous tiger intentionally stood up straighter, folding his arms across his chest, hiding bulging muscles behind more bulging muscles. The Bradburn Mook wasn't small by any stretch, and yet his ears still barely reached Tigra's mid-chest. Tigra stared down his nose at the man, showing fangs almost the size of fingers as he calmly said, "Madame Dolahan said move or be moved. Make choice." The man's hands balled into fists, though he had the decency to at least look afraid of what the massive tiger could do to him. The stare down continued for another 15 seconds before the man gave up. "Everyone, stand down. Take them back to the meeting room." Renetta was the first to move, her own people scrambling into motion and pushing a path through the slowly moving crowd of Bradburn forces. Most everyone lowered their weapons, save for a few outliers on the edges. As one, the Renetta crowd pushed through into the hall and were on their way. Corridor after corridor passed in tense fashion as Renetta's troops pushed forward, Bradburn's men falling in behind, though not all of them. About a quarter of the guard they'd seen started moving in the opposite direction, towards the concert. It was nice to know that Renetta and her people were being taken seriously. They could hear the concert starting up as they walked, though the further they walked, the more it settled into background noise, fading entirely as they reached the room where the summit was taking place. If they didn't get shot walking through the door, then there was hope they survived this night. The people at the front of the pack pushed through the door, hands on weapons, but nothing in a firing position. Leo didn't realize he was holding his breath until after he was inside the room. The summit was being held in a large conference room. Long sets of rectangular tables had been pulled together in a square to seat the surviving 13 and their aides. Even for those who'd never seen the present members of the 13 before, their perfectly pressed clothing and permanent looks of disdain for normal people gave them away. That, and the little placards placed in front of each member of the 13 designating their respective departments. Most had 2. Bradburn had 4. The look on Bradburn's face was the sweetest candy, permanently etching itself into Leo's memory. He scowled when he saw Leo, but his jaw dropped when he saw Renetta. The room fell silent. "And so the battle begins," Renetta said in a hushed voice only Leo was close enough to hear. Then, with a practiced politician's smile, she walked up to the nearest empty table. "Sorry I'm late. There was a mix-up and I didn't receive an invitation to this public forum. I didn't miss too much, I hope." The others stared at her in equal disbelief as she seated herself. News had been circulating for the past 2 months about Renetta Dolahan, having been reported dead, then alive, then dead again. Many of the ministers present consulted their aides in whispered voices, probably asking if they knew anything about this seeming miracle. A portly Snippard, seated to their right, was the first to find his voice. That would be Edelston, the Minister of Transportation. "No, Madame Dolahan, we've only truly been in session for about 15 minutes. As I'm sure you can guess, we've accomplished nothing of value in that time." Dolahan directed her smile at him, giving a nod of understanding. Maybe they were friends? Or at least, not enemies? "Chief Parsons?" Renetta asked, beckoning him forward with a finger. Not expecting to be addressed at all during this event, it took Leo a second to respond. Stepping forward, he asked, "Ma'am?" Looking across the table, Renetta fixed her gaze upon Bradburn. The living mountain of a Snippard had a forest fire of anger behind his eyes. Though for how big Bradburn had always been to Leo, somehow having Tigra in the same room made Bradburn seem like a more manageable size. With perfect calm, confidence, and control, Renetta said, "I believe there has been further mix-up. It would seem someone erroneously placed the Minister of Labour title in front of Emergency Minister Bradburn. Would you be a dear and fetch it for me, love? I'd hate for anyone present to forget who the real Minister of Labour is." "Yes, ma'am," Leo said with a nod. Keeping a shotgun held to his chest, not aggressively, just visible to everyone, Leo walked the perimeter of the tables. The room was extremely crowded now, as all the empty space between the tables and the walls had been filled with security personnel for each of the 13. Of the ministers, Bradburn and Renetta had the clear majority. Everyone else had brought maybe a half a dozen personal security guards, while Bradburn's and Renetta's both numbered in the hundreds. So the room was just a little crowded, in the same way that storm days only brought a little rain. The Bradburn forces solidified in front of him,
forming a living wall of scowls and newly stitched uniforms. If they didn't want to let him go around, he'd just have to go through. There's something liberating about breaking social convention in front of a crowd of the most important people in the world. Leo felt it as an exhilarating wave as he knocked over some papers, vaulting over the nearest table. There was no one in the center of this square of tables, obviously, because those present needed to see each other. So there was no one to stop Leo from walking right up to Bradburn's table and plucking up the little placard that still read, Minister of Labor, Renetta Dolahan. It was impossible to keep the grin from his face, and he allowed himself to whisper, "Told you that it wasn't your position to hold, Bradburn." Bradburn returned the whisper, fighting and failing to keep a neutral face as he shot a sideways glare at Leo. "You're leaving this meeting in a body bag, Parsons. And you're leaving it in cuffs." That brought a snarl. "Over my dead body." "Guess we'll see, sir." With that, Leo strode back through the empty center as every pair of eyes in the room watched him hand Renetta her placard. She took it, giving a rather loud, "Thank you, Chief Parsons," before placing it in front of her with the delicate attention of a seamstress. She continued messing with it for several long moments. If looks could kill, Walter Bradburn would have murdered her a third time. Finally satisfied at obtaining the attention of all in the room, Renetta folded her hands on the table. "That's better." Surveying the table with that political smile still plastered to her face, Renetta asked the room, "Now, shall we continue?" Chapter 51. Mouse in the Walls. Moira couldn't believe her ears. There was only one band in all of Cyphus that used synth that effectively for music. This was a Midnight Thunder concert? It'd been over a year since the last one she'd attended. Due to her mother's eternal state of busy as a minister, Sergei had taken her to that one. Midnight Thunder was a mixed band. Drums and keyboard were played by Sneppards, while the electrum guitar and vocals were both Nulf's. And said vocalist, Tyler McLyle, had a range that would make a male operatic jealous. He'd had vocal lessons and coaching somewhere, and combined with his natural talent, it had paid off in spades. "Want to see from my shoulders, for old time's sake, Miss Moira?" Sergei asked from beside her. Moira turned to Sergei and shook her head. While it was true that she couldn't see over the crowd, majority of whom were lanky Nulfs, it wasn't the visuals that made a Midnight Thunder concert so gripping. The electrum battery in her mask hummed in a way that begged her to harmonize it with the synth flowing from the enormous speakers on stage. The amplifiers Ame had installed on these earpads were incredible. Every note felt alive, her ears picking out the individual layers that built into a wave of sound that swept her away to a happier place. There were pieces within the live performance that came close to approximating some of nature's own elemental songs. With the drum and synth and guitar working together, they'd almost stumbled onto Electrum's song. Indeed, the stage lighting pulsed and flickered, changing colors in time with the music. She'd always assumed that was just the stage hands, but maybe there was more to it. "I can't see your mouth through that mask," Sergei continued. "But I hope you're taking a moment to enjoy yourself, Miss Moira." "I'm grinning from ear to ear," she said, voice coming out a little louder than intended from her mouthpiece. Activating the ears activated the speaker, too. On the other side of her, Naomi was tapping her foot right along with the drums. She called out over the song, "Listening to these guys from your cassette is one thing, but you can't beat hearing them live." Naomi wore an eager grin, her mask dangling from its clip by her chin. Then she leaned over to give Marston a friendly nudge to the ribs. "Lighten up, dude. Let yourself enjoy something fun for once." Marston shot her a glare, clenching his fingers to stop his hand before it reached a weapon. "We're not here to have fun. We're here to prevent disaster." "And to listen to good music while we play defense," Naomi insisted. "It's childish." "It's awesome!" Moira broke in. He looked down at her, the only thing that he could have done to threaten her good mood. "I respectfully disagree, Miss Dolahan." She rolled her eyes. "Mom's gonna be fine. Relax, man.
You look like you accidentally stuffed your tail in your underwear. Marston's hand came to rest on his hip, his finger tapping a furious rhythm that didn't match anything they were hearing. With a shake of his head, he turned his gaze back out on the crowd. More of his men would be out there, scanning the crowd, looking for anyone in a green and white jacket or with fractal glow. Can't believe I'm being punished with babysitting duty, he growled. Despite saying it in a low whisper, it sounded almost at normal conversational volume to Moira's enhanced hearing. This mask was awesome. Before she could respond, Sergei cut in, somehow having heard the remark. If you'd ever been bothered to spend time with Miss Moira, Mr. Marston, I think you'd have found her to need little in the way of babysitting. She's a competent young woman and has led me on many fun adventures. Like the time you brought her back high on Fractal, Marston countered. That's a low blow, Moira snapped. At the time, I thought Mom was dead. Oh, so you did the responsible thing and turned to drugs? Because you drowning your sorrows in alcohol was so much more responsible? She shot back. Marston tensed, his gaze settling into a glower. Finally he muttered, At least it was legal. Not to interrupt some lovely banter and light-hearted teasing between good friends, Naomi said. But there's a small group over by the opposite wall that have some fractal glow going on. Moira allowed herself a huff. Good. Let's go check it out. Stepping up behind Naomi, she looked up at her friend. Lead the way. With a quick nod, Naomi started out into the crowd. Moira followed, and it took only 15 seconds to realize that Sergei and Marston were both on her tail. Sergei she didn't mind, but Marston? He was having a hissy fit that he wasn't by her mother's side. She really didn't feel like dealing with that right now. If he wanted to be a pill and be mouthy, then she'd have to ditch him. Maybe a good few minutes of panic would be good for his heart. At the very least, it was what he deserved for his attitude. She sighed. That was cruel, even for her. So as much as she didn't want to be around Marston anymore, she dismissed thoughts of ditching him. That was a luxury she couldn't really indulge right now. The crowd erupted into applause as the last song ended and a new one began. After a few minutes of careful weaving and more than a few passing excuse me's, they reached the group Naomi had spotted. They were all Nulfs, each one dancing gracelessly to the music. About 6 in this group had fractal glow in their eyes, as did the group of 4 to their right and the group of 5 to their left. There's more than I first spotted, Naomi noted before stepping up to the closest one. Where'd you find fractal? She asked. I could use some myself. I got Christum on me. The Nulf turned to look at her, then shrugged. Not sure what you're talking about, man. I'm just enjoying the music. She narrowed her eyes, but it did nothing to affect his zoned-out expression. He nodded at them, adding, Sick costumes, dudes. Naomi sighed, shaking her head. She turned to make a comment to Moira, then froze. Her nose twitched, and she took several loud sniffs. Perking up, she turned towards the wall. I smell necrum. Okay, that was a start. Pushing around the crowd, Naomi followed her nose, Moira right on her heels. It led them both right up to the wall. Naomi's nose tilted upwards. Bingo, she said, pointing up at a vent in the wall. Closing her eyes, Moira began filtering through the cacophony of noises in this concert. She needed to focus in on a single song. After a moment's concentration, she found it. Yeah, it's Necrum. Cursing, Naomi pulled on her mask. What's the matter? Marston asked. Naomi pointed up at the vent. Fractal's coming out up there. There's probably more. Marston looked almost relieved to hear this, probably just glad to have something to do. I'll have my men track it down. Sure, he could do that. Or... Sergei, Moira said, waving him over. I'll take that boost now. Miss Moira? She gestured up at the vent. It's too small for any of you, but I can totally fit in there. It's like Seed Mother designed me for it. Absolutely not, Marston said, stepping into her space and folding his arms like a disapproving teacher. I don't remember asking for your permission, Marston. Your mother tasked me with keeping you safe.
Safe and smothered are not the same things, Dipdross. Marston's lip curled at the name, and he lifted a finger. There is literal poison coming out of that vent. Plus, if we put you in there, there's no guarantee you'll be able to get yourself out on the other side. First of all, we're assuming it's toxic, but I have a mask and plenty of prism to breathe. I'll be fine. Second of all, I'm a prodigy Alchemancer now. If I can't even get out of a closed vent, then I don't deserve to wear this suit. She turned, holding out her arms. Sergei, my boost. He smirked. As you wish, Miss Moira. Hoisting her up in his powerful arms, Moira was reminded just how light she was. If it was anyone but Sergei lifting her, it would have been frightening. But there was no one she trusted more in the entire bulb than her dear, beloved driver. Reaching overhead, Naomi jammed the end of her crowbar under the vent cover and popped it free. As Sergei brought her closer, Moira gripped the edges of the vent. We'll be right behind you, Pips, Naomi said, giving her friend a thumbs up. We'll find a way around. I forbid this, Marston said in a firm tone. I was told to keep you safe, and I can't do that when I let you out of my sight. Then you better catch up to me quick. Otherwise, I'd have to keep myself safe, and I don't know how I'll manage. Her sarcasm was not lost on him, but neither did it improve his mood. Forcing calm into his voice, he tried one more approach. Please, reconsider this, Miss Dolahan. After a few moments of pretending to consider, she shook her head. Her mind had been made up the moment they'd found the vent. Plus, now that her head was inches from the opening, the Necrom was easier to hear. There was something almost alien in its song, and it sparked her curiosity into an open flame. It sounds like it continues going up, she said. Find your way to the upper floors and I'll meet you guys there. Sergei reached up to lay a hand over hers. The blasted enormous man didn't even need to use his tiptoes to do so. Be safe, Miss Moira. She took his hand in both of her own. I will. Then she grinned within her mask. Race you guys up there! Spinning on her rump, she crawled into the vent. To say she had space in this vent was an overstatement. Yes, she was small enough to fit, but if at any point she had to turn around, it would take an effort of contortion that might snap her spine. Yet, this was an entirely new experience, and that thrilled her. How many people in Cyphus could claim that they'd ever clambered around in a ventilation system? The sounds of the concert bounced around the rectangular metal walls, fading with distance. As it did, the Necrom grew easier to hear, along with the Aurum that carried it. Without the mask, she'd have never heard them. But with the mask? There was another song, a more calming backing to the Necrom's natural excitement. As a test, Moira started humming a tune that the last month of practice had made second nature to her. Her suspicion was confirmed as the vents took on a faint green light. There was Tarum being pumped in along with the Necrom. In smaller quantities, that, or it just traveled slower than the Necrom. Regardless, it was still there. A loud whirring sound ahead alerted her to the first obstacle in her journey. Rounding the next corner brought her almost nose to blade with a large fan. She'd known it was coming, she'd heard it for a while, but she hadn't expected it to be installed on a corner. Wouldn't that hurt the airflow? Whatever, she was a high schooler, not an engineer, and this fan was in her way. Scooting backwards a few feet, she reached down for her bag of crystals. Time to take a page from Naomi's book. Selecting an Aquam crystal, she loaded it into her new cassette catalyst. Then she crushed it. Her own private concert began as Aquam voices joined with the Necrom and Tarum already in the vent, backed by the high-pitched whine of the fan like the white noise of a crowd. The Aquam waited for something to do, suspended like a cork bobbing in a pool of water. At Moira's direction, a cloud of frost filled the vent, flowing around the corner countercurrent to the fan. There was a horrible pop as the ice flooded the fan's small motor, solidifying and causing it to seize. Then the current stopped. Crawling forward, she inspected her work. A large clump of ice locked the center of the fan firmly in place. The residual magic in the vent cast just enough light for her to spot a faint plume of smoke rising from the motor. Even if the ice melted, this fan wasn't spinning again. At least, the motor wouldn't be spinning it.
From there, it was a simple matter of squeezing between the blades. It was tight, but she only had to suck in her stomach for a few key moments to make it through. She encountered another fan a few minutes later and dealt with it in similar fashion. This time, she used the ice to twist the fan blades and give her extra breathing room. The next obstacle wasn't life-threatening. Well, not yet. She'd reached another T-junction, only this time it went up. Poking her head in, she glanced up, humming softly to keep the tarim in the air glowing. While the junction didn't go any further down, allowing her to stand up in it without issue, it just went up and up and up. Oh boy. So she just needed to climb a smooth metal surface without handholds or any sort of safety net if she slipped. Easy. Carefully, she pressed her back to the wall of the vent, bringing her feet in to test it. The wall behind her bowed slightly, making a metallic wobble sound that echoed away in all directions. Worse, she was not a convenient height for this part. Despite being the shortest woman in Cyphus, her legs were too long to fit straight across from her, so she had to put them awkwardly, almost painfully, in the corners. Planting her hands against the sides of the walls, she shimmied upwards. She got several feet off the ground when she felt herself slipping. Her claws shot out, and miraculously, found purchase in the flimsy metal, stopping her fall. After taking a moment to catch her breath and calm her racing heart, she tested another shimmy. Progress was slow and painful. She wasn't sure how long it took her to reach the next floor, but it was minutes at least. Wedging herself in place and locking her claws, she took a moment to rest. It wasn't great rest because her muscles were still straining, despite being in an almost seated position. And still the call of Necrum and Tarum filtered down from overhead. She was getting much closer to the source, she knew. Unfortunately, it seemed like it was at the top of this shaft. If she continued at her current pace, she'd either make it by tomorrow or slip and fall and die alone in a vent. She was in so deep, they'd have to locate her by the smell, like finding a mouse that's been dead in the pantry walls for a week and a half. She rolled her eyes. She was thinking like Moira the spoiled rich kid, not Moira the Alchemancer. What would Naira do in this situation? Naira got a cool electromagnetic climbing suit. She'd just use Electrum to magnet walk herself to the top. Moira didn't have that option. Aurum? It was a possibility. With the narrowness of the vent, she could easily launch herself upwards, and then what? Catch herself with her claws before she fell? That sounded both painful and exhausting. The glow in the vent grew even brighter. Her humming had increased in proportion to her thinking. Little bits of flowery vine began growing out of the gaps where the sheet metal vents fit together. That was it. Thinking like Naira didn't mean getting hung up on any one element. If you wanted to think like Naira, you used them all. Popping an Aquam cartridge in her cassette, she serenaded the magic to fill the portion of vent directly beneath her. Ice flooded into the space, crackling as it expanded. It spilled out into the junction, allowing access to the floor she just passed, adding an additional layer of stability to lock the chunk of ice in place. Carefully, Moira uncompressed herself and tested her weight on it. It was cold through her open-toed boots, but most importantly, it held. Kneeling down, she ejected the spent Aquam crystal, loading an Aurum cartridge like switching cassettes. Then she pressed play. The chorus of Aurum swirled around her, gathering beneath her as her voice rang through the vents. Then the Aurum shot her straight into the air. Moira rocketed through the vent, carried upwards on a cushion of air as firm and supporting her weight as Sergei's hands. The song was already fading, and she could see light overhead. Not just Tarum light, but a reflective surface. She was reaching the end of the vent. Modifying the song, she asked the magic to suspend her for just a few moments. It did so awkwardly, undulating beneath her as the reaction's strength continued to fade. So she sang to the Tarum on the air. Vines burst forth with beautiful flowers that would never see the sunlight. Green tendrils swept beneath her, wrapping themselves into any gap or crevice they could find. Spending another Aquam cartridge, she added ice to the mix, freezing the vines in place where they worked for purchase. The Aurum ran out. For a terrifying split second, she was falling. Her foot slipped on vine, and she tumbled forward, nearly banging her head into the wall. A seed of vines caught her before she fell any further, and it held. Oh, thank Seed Mother. A rush of exhilaration still muddied Moira's mind. That had been stupid and reckless and not thought through and it had been awesome. She laughed despite herself. Her heart still pounded inside her chest. Moira wasn't an adrenaline junkie, and a very real part of her was terrified of heights. But she had options for overcoming that now, and it felt liberating in a way nothing else ever had. The tarum in the air continued to respond to her voice, flowers gaining more vibrant colors and releasing little clouds of pollen into the air like tiny fireworks to celebrate with her. Working with the little scaffold she'd created over a dozen floors up this vent, she commanded the vines to ascend. They did, more tarum in the air solidifying beneath her, plugging the vent and lifting her higher. A few moments later, her head hit the ceiling. It wasn't painful. The vines weren't moving that fast. It was still tarum after all, the most laid back of the reactions. As requested, it had brought her to the top, and she crawled dutifully on. The Necrom's sound was almost a scream now, like a vocalist who was determined to be louder than the guitars. She found its entrance point a moment later. This was the third obstacle she'd encountered in these vents, and this was one she couldn't circumvent with magic. There was a large machine in the way, using an enormous fan to flood the vents with this Necrom. A similar, but smaller machine blocked another entrance. This one was providing the tarum. Forced to backtrack, Moira eventually found a vent cover that wasn't blocked. With an aura-mated kick, the thing flew free and Moira tumbled out. Onto the roof. A torrent of rain greeted Moira, like the whole bulb was taking a shower. The nearby crash of lightning reminded her that it may be a controlled shower, but it wasn't a friendly one. Despite the instant displeasure at how much of her fur was soaked underneath her suit, Moira's breath caught as she looked around. The view from the enormous rooftop was incredible. You could see the baseball arena below. You could see the nearby mall and dozens of restaurants. Cyphus spread out from the center point in all directions, a brilliant collection of dots of light and moving vehicles and life. She turned to see... Tazael was standing near the edge of the roof, staring at the nearby central spire. Well, he was facing it, like he'd been staring at it, but now he turned to look at Moira. Calling his expression surprised was as redundant as telling him that he had a short fuse. He clearly hadn't expected anyone to show up out here, especially not by traveling through the vents. "Squeakers?" he asked, his voice dumbfounded. "Is that you in there?" "You know anyone else dumb enough to crawl through the vents to find you?" He regarded her with annoyance, though he was distracted. She'd interrupted something, but what? Raising her voice above the next crash of thunder, she called out, "What are you doing out here?" "Changing the world." "Right. Good. That was a sane person's answer." "How?" His eyes turned back to watch the central spire. Another bolt of lightning connected with it, bathing the world in white as a wave of thunder washed over them. When he did respond, his voice was uncharacteristically serene. "I'm going to help them all see." Great. Another perfectly sane and infuriatingly vague answer. "Necrom's going to help with that." He shrugged. "It's a special blend of fractal." "So what? You want to flood the venue with your special blend? And you think that's going to help people see what, exactly? That your fractal isn't like other fractal?" He shrugged again, rain running down his coat in streams. "Not my recipe, but it'll have the same effect." "Last time you tried something like this, people died." "Change requires sacrifice." Wow. Definitely a few crystals short of a full set. "So you'd sacrifice those people at the concert for your own ends?" He smirked, teeth gleaming in the flash of another bolt of lightning. The look he fixed her with made her blood run cold. "They're not the ones I'm sacrificing." She wasn't sure how to respond to that. Did he mean the summit? He had to, right? Before she could confirm her suspicions, he was talking again. "Beautiful, isn't it?"
There's something enthralling about lightning. Ignoring him, Moira turned her attention to the two enormous devices pumping elemental gas into the vents. If he wanted to run his mouth off and ramble, let him. Moira would use the time to do something useful. As expected, he kept talking. Have you never thought it odd to have lightning form within a glass dome? What makes the clouds and rain form? Why storm days are so consistently regular? Moira actually did know the answer to that. Her mother had researched it when she decided to break into the electrum battery industry. The central spire was part of Cyphus's largest power plant. It wasn't a rod to draw electricity. It was a way to vent the excess electricity the plant generated. Whatever special way it had been constructed allowed the electricity to ground itself with the bulb somehow. Moira wasn't a science person. Yet. Magic was quickly convincing her she needed to be, but that's what Naira would be for. She kept her answer to herself, however, instead examining the bulbous fractal pump. There were dozens of little valves and gauges, and all the important bits were housed inside a solid metal exterior. How heavy had this thing been to lug up to the roof? Had he had help? Tazale continued. Turns out, even storm days are just as much of a fraud as anything in Cyphus. This false peace, the fake smiles and barbed promises. I'm sick of it. It's time for the truth to come to light. Moira pressed the amplifier in her ears to the metal wall of the pump. The fact that this thing was pumping large quantities of fractal explained why the necrom sounded activated and energetic. Even more so inside the pump. The energetic tumbling of Orum's song accompanied the necrom, serving as the fractal's propellant out of the pump. But there was another hum quieter than both of those, that of an electrum battery. Faint. It must be tucked away rather deeply, but present. That had to be what powered it. Maybe she could overload it, or something. There's a dozen of those laid out strategically across the roof. You plan to shut them off one at a time, squeakers? She froze. He was watching her now with a rueful expression. How'd you get so much fractal? She asked. Figured that was obvious. You helped me with getting the primary ingredient. For the second time in just a few minutes, a chill settled in Moira's body, a chill that wasn't caused by the rain. The blood from the hospital. She'd meant it as a whisper, but the megaphone in her suit announced it quite loudly. It's all been building to this moment, Kit. The moment where the little guy, me, not you. You're little, but not in the societally oppressed sense like me. The little guy gets to put a torch to this hypocritical world's tales. His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. I'm ready to watch it burn. Well, I'm not, Moira said, again in too loud a voice. She was still getting used to speaking through the mask. Tazale let out a snort. Of course not, squeakers, because you're part of the problem. Okay, that was just slander. You don't know dross about me, Tazale, because you never bothered to learn. He turned then, hair and fur flat against his skull, water streaming down like someone had dumped a bucket over him. And still, shining through it all was that smile. It was one step away from an angry snarl, the grin of a madman. He began stalking towards her, counting off on his fingers. No. You're a spoiled little brat of a sneppard whose mother showed you love by buying you whatever you wanted. You've only ever attended nice schools. You've never ridden a bus in your life. Never had to walk more than the length of a shopping mall. What friends you have only want you for your money. The biggest crisis you've ever faced is whether your coat matches your pants, and let's be honest, it never has. You wouldn't know the first thing about what it means to have a hard life. You don't know what it is to go hungry because your family's budget is too tight to afford 3 meals a day. You don't know what it is to sleep in a huddled bundle with your whole family because a gas accident left your entire district without heating during the winter, and your people aren't worth prioritizing. You've never had to dig through the dumpsters to find a new pair of boots because your pads have grown so calloused from walking everywhere that finding even one well-used boot is a world-changing improvement. He threw his arms wide, stopping several feet away from her. By all means, stop me when I've missed the mark. Moira's face scrunched within her mask. There were elements of truth to a lot of his accusations, but none of it was the whole story. The longer he went on, the more angry she grew at his intentional assumption that her life didn't have any hardships, or that his family's hardships could in any way be blamed on her personal actions or beliefs. The growing anger made words difficult to come by, and she balled her fists in frustration. You, she began with an accusatory finger, are an egotistical, self-obsessed, self-pitying, presumptive, stupid man. It wasn't elegant, but it got her main frustrations out in the open. She kept going, not wanting to give him the satisfaction of making further presumptions. You don't know the first thing about me, and I've only gotten to know about you secondhand. I have very little idea what sorts of things you've been through during your life, but everything I hear from your mother, or from Naomi or Rolf, leaves me horrified. I cannot imagine growing up like you did. But don't you dare for a second presume that my life has been bracking peaches and rainbows because my mother is rich beyond reason. I've had almost no meaningful friends. I barely know what it feels like to be loved or appreciated. I'm only ever given what I'm allowed to want. My life has been so sheltered and controlled that I've never spent the night away from home until 4 weeks ago. You don't know what it's like to grow up in a home that feels like a prison, just like I can't begin to know what it's like to grow up in a house where food is a luxury, not a surety. So can we please stop making assumptions about each other and just listen and learn and help each other? He snorted, hands settling into his pockets as he blinked against the rain. Since when has a snepperd wanted to listen? If she could reach his neck, she'd throttle him. Beyond the height issue, it would just be fuel to his proverbial fire and turn into a fight she'd lose. But man, the thought was there. Look, she snapped. I get that there's a lot of people in Cyphus that don't give an ounce of dross about you or anyone like you. I get that there's a room full of snepperds down there having a discussion about the future of Nulfs, and there's not a single Nulf in a position to represent their interests. I get that there is a terrible history in this world of people growing complacent and shutting their eyes and ears to the needs of those around them because they're too afraid to lose what they have to rock the boat. But if you can't work with the people who do want you to have a voice, who do want to listen to what you have to say, then nothing you do is going to matter, because you'll be doomed to work alone until you get crushed under an uncaring boot. His amber eyes bored into her own. The smile settled from aggression to melancholy, which was a deeply unsettling transition. I was wrong about you, Kit. No dross, idiot. With a small shake of his head, he said, You remind me of my brother after all. She didn't know enough about Rindal to know how to take that. At least those who'd known him always spoke highly of him. He had a bigger vision than most of us. Where most of us only saw darkness, Ren brought light. He chuckled. And that's not me. I know that's not me. But Ren's dream is worth fighting for. So I'm going to make sure it comes true, no matter what it takes. Jezzael shrugged, glancing around the rooftop. In the end, I'm alone, because I'm the only one willing to go that far. Cyphus isn't going to wake up from a slap on the wrist or mild embarrassment. It needs an explosion that throws it out of bed and helps it realize the sewer just erupted from all the dross they've been stuffing down and ignoring forever. Tonight, I'm setting off that explosion. Jezzael, there are people here tonight willing to fight for you. People who care about what you've had to suffer. People who are disgusted by the state of this bulb. People who want a better life for everyone. Whatever you're doing, just stop. Please. Work with us. Don't keep fighting on your own. The melancholy spread to his eyes. Water sprayed as he shook his head. It's too late. Everything is already in motion. Even if I wanted to stop, chemical timers don't stop. It's necessary. Change has to happen. And I have to catalyze it. Moira gulped. He'd made up his mind. He'd already given up. Covertly, she loaded her cassette with an electrum cartridge. You said there's a dozen of these up here, pumping fractal into the vents? He glanced up at her, and the smirk returned to his gaze. I'm not letting you stop this, Squeakers. I'm not asking for your permission, Moira said. Pressing play on the cassette, electricity surged at the edges of her senses. Clamping her hand on the fractal pump beside her, Moira activated the speaker in her mask and started to sing. Chapter 52. Showing his hand. People were watching, so Naira grabbed her hostage by a puffy sleeve and yanked her off the hoverbike. Come on, she said, loud enough for the guards stationed at the stadium's side door to hear. Melissa staggered forward, visibly tugging against Naira's grip. Do you know who I am? She blustered. I'm Moira Dolahan. When my mother, the Minister of Labor, hears about this, you're toast, Alchemancer. A bit much, perhaps, but based on the stickers coming from the group of armed guards, it was having the intended effect. Naira marched Melissa forward. I've brought Dolahan's daughter for exchange. The closest Bradburn guard played with a necrol stick perched in his teeth. He took them both in at a glance. Naira in her unconcealed alchemancy suit, an old rifle balanced in her free hand, and Melissa in the poofy rainbow jacket with extra poof concealing the shotgun strapped to her chest. He snorted. They said to expect the whacked-out Nolf to make the trade. Thanks for dressing the part and making it obvious. Naira leveled a flat stare at him. The trade? She insisted, giving Melissa a shake. I'm not here for insipid commentary. The guard turned to inspect Melissa, several of his companions doing the same. So this is what the daughter of a 13 looks like. Thought she'd be cuter for a high school kid. For a teen, she looks older. There was a predatory look in the eyes of these men, and it left Naira feeling sick. My age is irrelevant, Melissa said with a sneer. What's important is that my mom is the Minister of Labor, and she's going to have your bracking rumps for this. She lunged for the guard, and Naira had to forcibly remind herself not to let go of Melissa's jacket. It was part of the act. The fact that Naira was tempted to drop it so early just to beat up a group of creeps was a bad sign. Salatra longed to be set loose. Soon. Well, Alchemancer, the guard said mockingly. Bring your catch inside, and we'll take care of the rest. 2 guards got the door. The one doing the talking grabbed Melissa by the arm to pull her inside. I got her, Naira said with a snarl. Show me where to bring her, and I will. But she stays right next to me until I see my family. The man pulled his hand back in a gesture of half-hearted surrender. Relax, Wolf. I understand how an exchange works. It had been a long time since anyone had called her Wolf. For as much bite as the step guard tried to load it with, it was about as effective as a toothless pup gumming an apple. She'd been called far worse, and this guy was barely worth the electrum it would take to drop him. After she found a lane. Guiding Melissa inside, the pair followed as creep guard number 1 took point. Melissa leaned in, dropping her voice to a whisper. We're taking them all out before this is all over, right? Naira snorted. Absolutely. Right this way, head creep called. They followed, maintaining a bit of distance so they could continue whispering. When we find Elaine, Naira said in a hushed voice, we're likely going to have to fight our way out. I really don't think Bradburn's the type to let any of us walk away from this. So when the time comes, I'll punch us a hole, and you keep my husband safe. As for anyone who gets in our way... She trailed off, and Melissa nodded. Sounds good to me. Then she shuddered. Seed Mother, I hate this. The deception? No. This stupid, ridiculous, bright and constricting jacket. And the terribleman that won us all dead. Nothing about this situation is comfortable. Anytime I so much as glance down at what I'm wearing, I assume my eyes are going to burst into flames from all the colors. More guards spilled out of hallways as they passed, falling in as head creep issued hand signals. It wasn't long before their entourage consisted of almost 24 of Bradburn's troops. The back hallways of the stadium were industrial and barren. Aging pipes ran along the walls and ceilings. Every third electrum bulb was flickering or burnt out, the walls a cold and unsympathetic concrete. They were narrow, too. Fighting in corridors like these would be cramped, something that might just be to Naira and Melissa's advantage. A whiff reached Naira even through her mask, and her mind blanked. She could smell Elaine, and the scent was fresh. "He is here," she hissed at Melissa. Melissa gave a small nod, glancing at the large pack of guards behind them as she whispered, "We're going to get him out, whatever it takes." Ahead of them, the man in charge flung open a set of double doors. Other guards stepped up to hold them open as he led the group inside. The room was rather large, a place for storing more unwieldy stage equipment. There were cages in here, barbaric metal boxes not quite tall enough for a person, even a snepperd, to stand up in. Of the nearly dozen cages, every single one was slicked with blood. Each cage was empty, save for one. "Elaine!" Naira cried out. He looked up within his cage before a large group of guards stepped forward to block the couple's view of each other. "Salatra," a familiar voice called from the side of the room. "Based on your earlier actions, I'd assumed you were perfectly happy to leave this man for dead. I guess Bradburn was right about you after all." Naira snarled inside her mask, not wanting to acknowledge the voice of someone who should have been a friend. She couldn't stop herself from responding, though she didn't bother to look his direction. "I'd do anything for my family, Dravota. I'd thought you were the same." That earned her a scoff as the Nulfin man stepped to the front of the crowd. He was dressed in a lab coat that was dotted at the base with a smattering of dried blood. "Everything I do is for family," he said, his voice seething. "So he has your family too?" "Only until this exchange is dealt with." She shot him a look, trying to gauge what that meant. Was he presenting himself as a fellow victim? Or was he simply annoyed to have to deal with her at all? The ice in his eyes made it impossible to tell. There was hatred there, and best she could tell, it was directed at her. Why? "Then let's hurry up and get on with it, for both our sakes." Dravota laughed. "Salatra, you were never one to just stop and smell the roses, to enjoy the quiet times as they come. No, you always had to leave the bike in the highest gear and drive so fast your skin peeled off. You're not even the least bit inclined to tap the brakes and learn why the world's gone upside down. Let Elaine go, and then you can talk to your heart's content." With another laugh, Dravota shook his head. "You heard the lady. Take the girl and bring my old friend her husband." Naira's mind was racing. She'd known Dravota had played some part in this, though she still wasn't sure what. Vanina, her own son, was involved somehow, but she didn't smell him in here. Unfortunately, Dravota's presence made this a dangerous encounter. It was already going to be difficult enough for Naira and Melissa to handle 24 guards on their own. Dravota had been a decent Alchemancer back in the racing days. He could tip the scales of the coming fight in either direction. If they couldn't get him to join them, then she'd have to deal with him immediately. Melissa gave her a small nod of encouragement, and Naira released her. There was trust in the detective's eyes, and a healthy amount of determination. As the guards stepped up and took Melissa's arms, she leaned into the role, kicking them and making a rather loud fuss. A horrible shriek of metal on metal announced the opening of the cage. The crowd behind Dravota undulated as they passed Elaine forward. He stumbled out of the group of guards as the last one shoved him roughly in Naira's direction. He was haggard now, emaciated to 2/3 of the already lean man he used to be. Much of his silver fur had gone gray or black, and dried blood clumped in numerous places beneath his fur. He was having trouble standing fully upright, and his breathing was shallow. His eyes were sunken, hollow, distant. But that wasn't what made Naira's breath catch. Elaine's scent was overwhelming, and all of her senses were confirming for her that this was the man she loved with every ounce of her being. So why did he still have both hands? He staggered again, and Naira rushed forward to catch him. "Elaine!" She could feel his bones poking her as she supported him. It did nothing to stop the fierce hug she now gripped him in. Never again would she let him go. "Elaine, I'm so sorry." "Leave, Starlight," he rasped.
kill you. They can certainly try, she snarled beneath her breath. I'm not leaving without you. You have to leave me. I'm already dead. She squeezed him tighter. Don't you say that. As long as you have breath in your lungs and warmth in your chest, you're alive. I don't feel alive. Starlight, you don't know what they've done to me. It was impossible to keep the growl from her voice. Don't worry, Elaine. They're going to pay. She glanced up from his shoulder and was surprised to see Dravota ushering guards out of the room. Even the ones who'd grabbed Melissa had left her in a corner of the room and now exited through the doors. It couldn't be that easy. Where are they going? Naira asked aloud. Dravota gave her a smile that made her skin crawl. Just outside. A reunion like this should be granted a measure of privacy. You need time to say your goodbyes. Naira instinctively bit into the prism tube in her mouth, breathing it in. Her body was entering full fight mode. What in Fanina do you mean, goodbyes? In response, Dravota pulled out a gun. A few guards beside her took aim as well. A single heartbeat later, they all fired on Elaine. Salatra burst onto the scene as Naira activated both electrum batteries. Her forearm plating sprang to life as the magnets activated. Her suit kept bullets from entering the back of Elaine's head or his chest where she gripped him, but it could do nothing to protect his limbs. Over a half-dozen fresh holes ripped through his arms and legs in a spray of overly dark blood. Naira spun into a crouch, shielding Elaine's body with her own, but the gunfire had already stopped. She only vaguely registered Melissa's string of profanities as the detective struggled to undo her jacket zipper. Elaine was alive. He was still alive. Nothing vital had been hit, but those monsters had still shot him. Salatra wanted to explode. She needed to explode. The lightning was only barely being kept back. I'll leave you to it, Dravota said. Throwing a hand behind her, Naira unleashed a torrent of electrum. The blue lightning surged forward, catching two of the guards and arcing between them until they both collapsed to the floor in uncontrolled convulsions. Dravota had already reached the door, pulling it closed as Naira's next blast of electrum just barely fell short of him. Cure him. She needed cure him. Heal Elaine, give him to Melissa, kill Dravota and anyone in her way. That was the plan. That's what this situation required. Naira, something's wrong with him, Melissa called. She'd finally gotten the jacket open, donned her mask, and pulled her shotgun into a ready position, but her eyes were fixed on Elaine. Naira fumbled by feel for where she kept her curum. Melissa was right. Elaine's wounds, while still dripping blood, were closing on their own. A prismatic glow formed in his eyes. Can't breathe, he groaned. Oh, Fanina. No. 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 Not Elaine. Not her husband. He couldn't. This was not happening. She hugged him tighter. Elaine, dear, I need you to stay calm, okay? The words were almost impossible to force out, like her entire mouth had been numbed for a massive dental procedure. Naira, he's changing. No, no. She'd come so far, done all of this for him. She couldn't lose him now. His voice rasped beside her ear as she clung to him. I'm already dead, Starlight. Let me go. Tears spilled free as Salatra's fury was overshadowed by Naira's present horror and grief. I refuse! Elaine's response wasn't words. It was a growl. Then his teeth pierced Naira's throat. End of part 6.